Hi Claire, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you guys?
I'm well, thanks.
Hi, Claire. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for inviting me on your podcast. I feel honored.
So, where are you right now? That doesn't look like Bogota. I can see like the trees in the background, and that's not very Bogota.
No, I mean, Bogota does have some amazing mountains, but no, I'm a couple of hours south of Bogota in the mountains, and it's tropical. I love Bogota, but I definitely have to escape quite often. It's an
Yeah,
amazing city with loads going on, but it's, as you probably know, I'm sure you've both been, it can be quite hectic.
yeah,
So I do my best to get into tropical landscapes as much as I can.
yeah. Cool. So,
It's not a city. It's not a city that is easy to describe. I'll say. Do you have a short description for it? I always struggle being from there.
Ah, you're from
Like,
Bogota.
yeah,
I think it's a city that reveals itself to you over time. So when I first got there, I was
yeah,
rebelling massively. I was like, it's so much concrete and there's traffic all the time. And now I'm like, this is a very cool city where everyone's always going out.
yeah,
Like there's new clubs that are opening, amazing new
yeah,
restaurants, like a really cool cultural scene. Last year they
yeah.
had the first kind of public art biennale, and that's happening again soon. There's an art fair. I think there's a lot going on, and there's lots of
A
energy.
lot,
Like I love that, and
a
more
mhm.
lot of
people coming back from like Colombians that have been living abroad and have come back, and they're starting a business in Bogota, and I feel like there's a really good, positive, dynamic energy in the city at the moment.
It's so
good.
much more international too, though, right? Than Medellin or Cali or anywhere. It just has this. I don't know. It's very eclectic vibe to it that you can kind of find anything.
Yeah,
Yeah, it definitely is. I think it's international in a different way to Medellin. Like now, I
Hmm.
think Medellin is very international, but like in a short term way, where you have
Hmm.
people that are working
Yeah.
there. Like it's a very specific type of person that goes to Medellin, whereas I feel Bogota, because it is a bit rainier, it's a bit more hectic. It's more, I think, people that are probably living there for a longer period of time.
Hmm.
underground.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if you would agree with that, Juliana, as you're actually
Oh,
from
absolutely. I
Bogota.
love to hear that because I agree. I agree with it. And the music scene, and it's a party city. So you can always do that. It's a very nocturnal city, I would say, in comparison with, although Colombia is also
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Like
but
everywhere in Colombia, I feel like it's
that's
just
not
like,
also true. Well, Petronio was just canceled, by the way, which is really sad.
oh, it was. I didn't hear
Yeah,
that.
I was
because of,
supposed to be going, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
But then, given that Colombia is so nocturnal, people still madrugar next day, 6 a.m., they're up and
Oh,
out.
yeah.
Like, how do you just have this boundless energy? I'm yet to crack
Ah,
that part of the cultural mystery, I think. I can't do it.
so refreshing to talk with someone that understands our craziness.
I
Nocturnal
think,
and then starting everything at 4 a.m., which is, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I think it's like so I've been here for like almost 2.5 years, and I feel now I'm just starting to manage to unpick everything, like
Uh,
it's things are starting to come into focus and make sense, and I'm like, wow, I still have so much to learn and always will have more to learn.
yeah, yeah.
But that's
But I
fascinating,
was
right? Like that's something that drives you as like a writer and a journalist to understand these things, and that's it's. I've been reporting on the region for like 20 something years now, and it's just like there's there's just so much weirdness and things that like just pique your interest. It's like this is not like how I grew up or whatever, and it just like keeps revealing itself. And especially the more you travel around the country and you see how distinct every region and landscape is, just yeah, it's endlessly intriguing.
Yeah, and how did you end there, Claire, by the way? Why Colombia after
so
all the other places you lived in?
yeah. I mean, to be completely honest, I I studied French and literature at university, and when I was working at The Economist, editing the online culture section, I was always very interested in what was happening with like the West African art scene. I've always loved the music from that region, and I actually thought that was where I would end up, like Senegal, that region of the world, and then actually decided that that wasn't quite that beat wouldn't work for me. So I then chose. Well, I spoke to the Latin America editor and was like, "Look, where do you not have correspondence? Like, where makes the most sense strategically?" And there was a kind of bunch of countries in Latin America, and I I'd never been to Colombia, but I'd had friends that had travelled through, and I thought there was lots of like themes that were really relevant to what I'm interested in. So just politically, Petro had recently come into power, so a huge kind of shift in the country's politics. Then the Amazon, always been something that's fascinated me, like conservation, environmental reporting, and all of the music, like all of Colombia's diverse rhythms from the Caribbean to the Pacific, that connection via kind of the history of slavery with West Africa, and obviously loads of travel, like travel kind of being a booming sector in Colombia. So I thought that that diversity of stories would and also complements my interests, and that's how I ended up in Colombia, without speaking Spanish, which did make things quite complicated at the beginning, but I think I found my feet after a couple of years. Yeah.
So there's a lot happening right now in Colombia. Like if I were to choose a time to come to move to Colombia and report on it, like you couldn't have picked a better time. Just the amount of news coming out of Colombia all the time, it seems, is like it's crazy. And like, I mean, first of all, we should talk a little bit about the earthquake. You just went to Quibdó, right? It's one of the worst affected areas. What was that like? What did you see there?
Yeah. So, I mean, this happened 2 Mondays ago. The earthquake was 7.4 magnitude, and I was in Bogotá at the time, and it's one of these weird situations where Bogotá, the capital, we barely felt it, likewise with Medellin, and then sort of slowly throughout like that morning, because it struck at like 7:30, yeah, in the morning. There was just all these reports coming in of like how bad things were getting, progressively worse, and the epicenter was in San Jose de Palmar, which is really rural, tiny, tiny little town in Choco. And I'd previously done some reporting with this medical brigade who fly. They're called La Patrulla Aérea Colombia. Amazing organization, and they fly in volunteer pilots with medics, with psychologists, whatever they need, all around the country. And they were doing a medical brigade with psychologists on the Tuesday to Quibdó. So I was like, please let me come with you. And they very kindly got me in their planes, and we went. And I think I was the first person there that from like the journalist side of things. The president had arrived the day before, and they'd airlifted some patients out. And it's just one of these really sad situations where people, I think, they weren't even angry, they were just resigned. Like, I got into the town, which is the departmental capital, and the damage wasn't immediately evident. So then we like drove down the street, and then there was just huge school, like a school that had been collapsed around the corner, another building that had completely crumbled and fallen on top of someone else's house. And this woman was like, "Oh, are you a journalist? Like, let me tell you what's happened, because no one's come here, no one's spoken to me, no one's asked me what's happened to my house." And that was like the same story that I just heard again and again and again, and all in different parts of the cities. There was like at the top of Quibdó, there was some women who were just sat on a street corner, kind of staring at what was the ruins of their house. And it was really dramatic, like an entire corner just collapsed. And all these men sitting around the corner just sort of chatting. And I mean, it's incredibly hot. It was one of the hottest places I feel like I've ever reported from. And they were just there, and they'd gone back into the houses to grab kind of pots and pans and the bits that they could. And they sort of set up this community kitchen. And their kids are there, also in the heat, playing, because all their schools, they can't go to school anymore. And they just said the same thing, like no one, not even from the local government, has come to look after us, to ask us how we are. And that was day 2, right? So I think by day 3 or 4, there was some aid, that people had come. So it was just this kind of, yeah, it's a place that's long been abandoned. Like the hospital that I visited is the only hospital in that entire region, which is home to just under 600,000 people, that is, has the license to perform not even complex surgeries, but kind of fairly
Hmm.
basic surgery. So all of these crises coming together, like this health crisis in Colombia, the lack of access that these people have to internet, to the state, and then on top of,
Hmm.
because there's no state presence, like everywhere in Quibdó you see these graffiti, which is the armed group claiming their territory. So they're also extorted by these armed groups
Hmm.
who capitalize on the fact that there's just no state there. So
Forgive my ignorance, but which armed group is trying to control Kibdu? Kibdo.
I I think it's the ELN, which is
Okay.
now the oldest Marxist-Leninist group in Colombia,
Hmm.
and the Clan de Golfo, who have their origins in paramilitaries, and they
Hmm.
are. I think there's more than 9,000 people in that group now. It's
Okay.
massive, and that
Right.
began on the Caribbean coast, and they are really expanding across Colombia. So like down across into Choco on that Pacific coast, over the border, up and into La Guajira. There's lots of violence. I
Hmm.
think they're even pushing kind of down towards the border with Venezuela. That's a very powerful armed group that the outgoing left wing government of Gustavo Petro
Hmm.
was trying to negotiate with them, I think fairly unsuccessfully, because he'd have to give them political status. And
Hmm.
so yeah, that's a big threat to Colombian security, and that's a big part of the new government's security strategy is clamping down on these armed groups. But just to go back to your original question about the
Yeah.
earthquake, the other affected regions are Cali, which is the city where the Petronio Alvarez festival is cancelled, and then the coffee region. So a lot of these towns in the coffee region are heritage towns. They're like the beautiful, protected little white houses with colourful doors, colourful windows, and balconies are completely collapsed. So Colombia has a huge job of reconstruction and rebuilding ahead of it.
Have coffee farms been affected? Out of
Yeah,
curiosity.
I haven't been to coffee regions since
Hmm.
the earthquake struck, but I understand that like thousands of coffee pickers have been affected, and
Yeah.
also the port, so the route by which
Yeah.
a lot of coffee is exported, so out through the Pacific coast.
Right.
That
Like
ta- that
to Buenaventura, right? That's like more than half of Colombia's coffee leaves from there. So
and that
yeah, I
that
get
that
how
city's a
you
mess.
export it. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
huh.
Yeah. But that
And
particular story of Buenaventura is another example of the kind of inequality of Colombia, right? Where it's a port city, there should be wealth generated from the port, and yet the scenes of destruction there are really, really terrible. Like, and not just in the city, but the kind of veredas, like the rural hamlets that you have to get there on a boat, totally devastated. And sort of 5, 6 days after the earthquake, activists, people from the community from Cali were arriving there and kind of filming the whole thing, being like, people using the collapsed ruins of their homes to rebuild paths in the town. Like that's how resourceful they are. So yeah.
um,
Yeah, I was thinking, I mean, obviously it has been in this week now less, and all media, main newspapers around the world, as it was Venezuela and other earthquakes, recent earthquakes. How to reconcile or put together or have a sense for people that are not actually there of all the different voices you hear, which is always a challenge, right? Like one thing is what critical reporters say, one thing is what the government says, and then what the international press picks up. It's a mix of views and perceptions, and it's always hard to know where the truth is. And obviously, it's not that truth is in one specific place because there are many different people involved with different experience of it. So, how you make sense of all that in your case, and how to like try to get a sense of of what's happening and what are the main things at the stake and what these tell us about the country. I know you have talked about two Colombians going on because of this situation. It shows obviously the class differences and the political situation. But how have you thought about it? Like, how, I mean, I guess when you are describing the situation, how to be accurate and just thorough. How do you handle that?
It's yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's hard. And I think the first thing is basically don't believe what you read. That's
Yeah.
kind of how I run until I fact checked it. I kind of have
Yeah.
like my filters, like a kind of select group of people who represent different backgrounds, different political perspectives, but it's got to be facts based. And I think like the thing with Colombia is like there is just so much news all the time. There's so much, like, I find the tone is quite angry of the news.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on, and
We
it's sort of
say,
figuring out like which of this is structural and has a real forward looking impact, and which of this is kind of like a scandal that's going to blow over in a day. And I think specifically with the earthquake, the response was so politicized for a couple of reasons. The first one being that on the Monday, the new foreign ministry decided to focus on kind of foreign policy as opposed to looking inwards and kind of getting humanitarian aid. And the kind of continued focus on regional alliances, so only really working with countries that were ideologically aligned with the new growing government, which really angered people, particularly in Cali, which is a very kind of typically left-wing city in Colombia that was also really on the front line of dealing with the earthquake. And at the same time, the kind of key agency in charge of dealing with any sort of natural disaster, whether it's the forest fires that we're seeing now and including that earthquake, had a huge corruption scandal over the last 2 years, and the new government hadn't appointed a new leader of that agency. So there was kind of like lots of different things intersecting, and then there was some fake news that came out. So it's like working back, I think, working back to the actual facts of who's in charge and what's happened. And often I have to ring someone that used to work in the government or used to work in a ministry to understand like what's the patchwork of bodies and organizations and legal things that need to work in Colombia in order for something to happen. So yeah, it just requires more work and more reporting, I think. And
yeah.
I think I'm always quite conscious on like what does a global reader want to understand from this as well, rather than just kind of reporting on like what am I seeing and feeling, which is valid.
Mhm.
What are people seeing and feeling? But also like what's the analysis and how can we make this
Yeah.
kind of more forward looking?
Yeah, it has to be informative no matter
Yeah.
what. Yeah. Huh.
But it is very polarized. And have I ever written something that, endless criticism from either side? And
Yeah.
like with the earthquake, what I noticed was it's just become very binary. Like you make a fair criticism of whichever government's in charge, and then immediately you're branded as being on the political opposite. So all of a sudden, I was kind of like a crazy leftist writing critical things of the new right government. It's like everything is taken out of context and it's very reductive. So I think my kind of plea always is like fighting for nuance and making space for nuance in reporting, which is just really hard at the moment.
Yeah. Yes.
But where are you from? You said you're from Bogota, Juliana, right?
Yes. Yes. I grew up in Bogota. I have lived in the States for 12 years now, in and out. But yeah, I mean, it's of course I have my own experience of this being, from afar, which is frustrating. And at the same time, obviously, you feel safer. And a great part of my family is not in Colombia.
Yeah.
Some are. My dad texted me right away from Bogota, like obviously scared as you were, I guess. And I had a bunch of colleagues in Cali and friends and all around Armenia and Choco. And so, it's, I don't know, it's all mixed, the immigrant experience and the migrant experience. And how all these, it's just makes you, I don't know, I feel that we all Colombians are so traumatized by some things that it's hard to to separate one thing from the other, and that
Well,
maybe that's the rage you feel, because you were going to say something, Nate.
yeah, I was just to say you're so traumatized, but like things just keep piling up on top of each other
I
all
know,
the time. It seems like
I know, but then that's why I'm saying it's hard to. Of course, it has to happen to us now, and it's like this. But at the same time, if you try to be objective, well, yes, but no, right? Because it always happen in different places, and then so I try to keep that calmness somehow. But since with my own work, I have to go to the armed conflict and help victims just through food, which is always a silver lining, but and cooking, but it's always in our mind, right? Especially because that process is going on, the peace process, and it's, as you say, it's piling up, it's not working, it's working, it's going to be better, it's going to be worse. These numbers of people um, criminal movements or movements outside the law are growing. So uh, I don't know what to say. I I think it's a country that needs a lot of patience and healing, but at the same time, we we are resilient, and I think it's true. I mean, I see this in every Colombian around the world. How resilient we are, how happy. I mean, I was comparing with other other countries in South America that I'm not going to name because I love that country, but how, like, no matter what, we are happy. No matter what happened, we are happy, and these other people, no matter what happens, they are kind of melancholic and not happy. So we have that. Why? I have no idea. I don't know if it's out of the harshness or and the hassle, but that helps us somehow. I saw right away after the earthquake, someone was showing me a picture of a family in Armenia. Like, we are here, we are fine, we are even smiling in the middle, which is not cynical. It's a survival mechanism. So I see both. I feel that Colombians, no matter what, will get through. And at the same time, as you say, Nick, is like, when is this going to end? When the drug stigma is going to leave us? And when we are going to make this beautiful attempt for peace work that has been so inspiring for all of us and around the world. So I don't know. It's complex and beautiful at
And
the same time and
yeah,
deep.
so, so you mentioned the drug stigma. I think we should talk about coca and what's kind of happening right now in the Amazon. And I know, Claire, you go there quite often, and
Yeah.
you see that that you wrote something I think was in The Economist about the war
yeah,
on cocaine and how it's just it's still a failure after all of these years. It's just like it
yeah,
just keeps hitting wall after wall, and it's just like it's almost pointless at this point to like be. You say, I think you compared it to like whack-a-mole, right? Like it's just
completely.
like yeah, it's just like a drug factory pops up and they blow it up, and then it just moves 5 kilometers down the road or whatever. Like, is there any progress going on whatsoever, or is it just hopeless at this point?
The question on it, is there any progress on?
And how do you how do you define progress is the big question.
I I think that it's to do with it's an economic problem, isn't it? Like these women that I met. So to kind of just for context, I flew to Putumayo, which is one of the larger, not the largest, but one of the larger coca growing areas on the border with Ecuador, and this was during the Petro administration. So the idea was not to target the coca fields,
Hmm.
but kind of shifting a policy to capturing more shipments of cocaine at the point where they're reaching the port. And then another part of the strategy was to kind of knock out the supply chain, so and that's the part that I was doing. So I went with the narcotics police, and they were kind of blowing up these. The word is laboratory, but it's a shack. It's super
Yeah. No,
rudimentary.
I've been
It's
to one before, and
yeah,
it's like a tent
yeah,
in the mountainside where just
yeah,
a guy with a fucking pot, and some gasoline, boiling things. And,
yeah. And they were, these women were super desperate. They were like, please don't blow up our shed because this is the only income we've got. We've got no help from the state. So you could see the military guys were empathetic. Like it's
mhm.
not a nice situation for them to be in, but they have to do it. And yeah, it's an economic thing. It's like unless these people have an alternative economy, which could be provided through cacao
Mhm.
or anything like that, they're just going to be forced into doing this. Then there's the pressure from armed groups. So I don't really think there's going to be. I don't think there's going to be kind of progress on clamping down on cocaine production until there's progress in sustainable development and providing alternative livelihoods in these really remote parts of Colombia where
Mhm.
you know, all people want is to kind of send their kids to school and to have a peaceful, safe life. But if there's no roads to take their papayas or their cacao to a market, if that cacao is not being sold on the international marketplace in a way that shows kind of the premium forestry growing techniques, it's just none of it's going to
Mhm.
work.
Right. Right.
And I think
No,
the other
I mean
side
it's
is the
like
kind of
that's one of the contradictions of sustainable development is that like everyone wants to support local agriculture and things, but then there's not really a local market for a lot of that agriculture. Like it has to be shipped off to Bogota or abroad to get the price that demands that kind of that work.
yeah. And also, I think coffee is kind of the most advanced example of this, where obviously now Colombia is drinking its own specialty coffee, and there's
Hmm.
specialty shops kind
Right.
of everywhere. But something like cacao, I mean, I went to this massive supermarket chain the other day in the east of Colombia, and there was one brand there that wasn't like a huge multinational, or like, it wasn't like a Colombian, that was kind of a specialty small
Hmm.
batch cacao brand. And I think there's still, it's too expensive, or there's those barriers still. And yeah, I think it's that there's a lot that needs to be done on selling Colombian produce. And I think with the new deforestation regulation coming into effect in Europe, I think Colombia is actually in a really good position to market its products. Is like, if they do implement their traceability law, then they can show that they've got premium products that they can sell to the European market. But there's still a lot of alignment that needs to be done, and a lot of coordination between different ministries who typically are not very good at
Hmm.
talking to each other. And just on the kind of how the conflict is affecting like supply chains. I like one of the first chefs I really met when I got to Colombia is Catalina Velez, who's got an amazing restaurant called Domingo in Cali. I'm sure you know it. And she was explaining to me how she has to be super flexible with all of her ingredients on her menu because
Hmm.
she was really wanting to work with women producers. I think she kind of generally in the south and west of Colombia, and she's like, sometimes they just don't reply because they've had to
Yeah.
move or they've had to be displaced, and then I don't know where my white cacao is going to come from, for example. So it's like the logistical headache for for the chefs
No,
of
yeah, like restaurants are already problematic economically. So having an unreliable supply chain is it's hard to do. It's a big risk for restaurants, even though I know there's a lot in Colombia that are taking this risk. But yeah, that's a major challenge.
I think part of the complexity of all this is like in a global, fast-paced, globalized world, it's impossible to separate it from the problem of the north and south divide. Uh, Still, the countries on the north controlling what's happening in the south.
Hmm.
That's still the case. We move from one terminology to the other. They are not now, like second world countries or third world countries, but
yeah.
the divide keeps happening. And so, why things pile up? Well, because that interaction, that power dynamic hasn't changed for the most part. What it takes for that to be changed, I have no idea. But leaders that are determined to make it change on the part of the countries of the south, and same on the north, right? But it's still some sort of colonization. So the big picture is, if we see similar things, maybe not necessarily with cocaine, are happening in other countries that are below the equator, right? In Africa, and to some extent in Southeast Asia. And then the other thing is that global local interaction in the context of food. You mentioned something, Claire, in when we were preparing for this conversation, which is, what does slow food mean in Colombia, right? Because you were saying these chefs, their purveyors are in the Amazon or in the Pacific coast or in the flatlands or in La Guajira. And what, I guess it's like what local means in Colombia, right? What is to what
Yeah.
does it mean to buy local? And I was curious about that because you mentioned that of one of the points we should talk about, and I think it has to do with this this uh, this aspect of the what do you- the suministro, no, the productos.
Yeah. I think in terms of like what does local mean, it's not even just in food, but it could be in music and art. And I
Yes,
think for
exactly.
so long, the reference point for good quality products has been imported from the US, right? That kind of colonized mindset.
Yeah,
And that's now changing. And chefs are definitely part of that, leading that charge. And yeah, the idea of like the European idea of slow food, that you should, I don't know how many kilometers away your farm should be from your restaurant, right? But it should be super close. And actually, it's the opposite here. It's like if you want to support communities in really far flung places, then you have to kind of bend over backwards to sort out a supply chain. And I think it's like a blessing and a curse. Like Colombia's geography is, I mean, it's one of the most fascinating places to travel in because of that, because you have deserts, jungles,
yeah,
mountains, Caribbean, everything. And that means that there's amazing diversity of ingredients, but it's like how to get that all back to the capital or to Medellin or wherever you're coming from.
to
And
the
yeah,
mountains, which are in the
back to the
center.
mountains.
Yeah, yeah,
And like
back
obviously
to
around Bogota, there's some incredible thinkers and people like growing tomatoes and food and
yeah,
all of the development that's happening in La Sabana. And you can see that when you fly, like there's just greenhouses with blueberries and whatever in them. But yeah, what you said earlier about the market power still being in the global north, US, Europe, that
yeah,
that sets up that dynamic. And I do feel that the new government is not just in Colombia, but in lots of right wing countries in Latin America. It's just opening the doors for the US to get their hands on more of Colombia and other countries' natural resources. So I think that dynamic is here to stay. I don't think that's going anywhere soon.
hmm, yeah. For some reason, Latin America and South America specifically is now, it's becoming a cool continent more and more. It's like the continent where people want to trade or visit or live, and that's always a double-edged sword, right? Same for Africa, I think it's double-edged sword in terms of, okay, why is that the case? There is more pride because it's motivating, it's inspiring. I think it motivates people to believe, oh, we to reflect about self-worth, and to revisit how we see ourselves, right? Which is a great opportunity. And in part, what all these chefs are doing is taking that opportunity and just evolve and flourish and shine. And we are very creative people, so that's great. But at the same time, why is that happening? Why are now the cool continents? That's always worrying, or something to be cautious about it.
I think it's. I mean, someone very cynically said to me the other day that like these boom areas tend to happen like 5 years after a civil war or some sort of conflict. It's like
Ah, that's
for not for the people in that country, but for foreigners, because everything's kind of there's often like a renaissance. It's like a starting from scratch. You have this feeling of discovering something. If you're
uh-huh.
coming from a global north currency, things are cheaper. So that's a very cynical reason.
Yeah,
And I do think that Colombia has, you know, for better or worse, in the eyes of the world, this sort of like dark glamour to it, because of its history of narco trafficking, all of the Netflix series. And people don't understand, they do not understand what that actually means, So they may still live in Medellin for 3 years and still not understand what it means.
yeah,
But I think that's why people are drawn to like Colombia more so than I don't know other parts of the region. But it's also like I think it's also there's like a prejudice that you have that you arrive and it disappears. Like I know loads of people who are like, if you just get people to come to Colombia, they fall in love with it and they will want to come multiple times. But it's kind of getting them through the door, to getting over this idea that what you kind of said a little while ago, Juliana, that there's like so many crises kind of all overlapping each other. There's an earthquake, there's the new version of the armed conflict, there's deforestation. Like that is not the daily reality for many people in Colombia, like there's super developed parts that's obviously linked to inequality, but it's you can live really well. You have this feeling of discovering. I think there's also kind of like a warmth that comes from this being in a more collective society. Like I think it is more collective, and whether that goes back to the role of family or religion. I think I saw this survey a couple of years ago that Colombians feel like amongst the countries that say they are the most loved, they feel the most loved. Colombia is one of those countries, right? And I think that you compare that to the loneliness that people feel in England, in the US, that people being estranged from their families. That is just not the situation here. People are trusting. Like as a journalist, it is. I'm always kind of humbled by how willing people are to like open their doors and share their lives with you, because I think there is still that warmth and sense of trust. And then the fact that people still dance in the streets, like the fact that there is music and there's alegria and there's all this stuff behind it, and maybe it's a way of avoiding the past and or the present, but it still happens. Like there's the best salsa festival in the world in Cali every Christmas, and Petronio Alvarez is one of the most incredible parties I've ever been to in my life. All Afro-Pacific music, people opening their houses. There's so much like humanity, and I think, yeah, that's really attractive.
so interesting you mentioned that because I have an endless discussion with someone here in LA, California, about why Colombians or South Americans, but specifically Colombians in this case, are so united and still, there is that sense of community and solidarity. And he keeps saying that it's because of Catholicism, and I resist to think is that. I mean, part of it is, yeah, as you say, religion, but it has to be something else. Well, in my case, that's clearly not. There are people that believe other things, or grew up in other ways, and we still share that. So there is something, I don't know, is the land why our coffee tends to be delicate, sometimes too acid for my taste, but sweet, balanced, delicate, subtle. These things have to be connected with our character, right? And this sweetness people mention, I keep hearing this of everyone that goes there, like, why I stayed, or why I would consider stay, because people are so nice. So it's still a mystery for me, and I think about this every day pretty much.
And it's not.
So
It's. I just want to jump in. It's not like regional either. It's everywhere.
no,
Whether you're in the Amazon or the mountains or the Caribbean, it's like it has nothing to do with the weather or the
exactly.
landscape. It's just
Yeah.
something
it,
in the Colombian
I
DNA. I don't
know.
know.
It's exactly. I wonder. How can this be? It's kind of amazing. I mean, and again, something to be proud of, and I would say, um, it's like a really powerful tool we have. I believe in that. I was having a discussion with long time ago, dreaming about having a hospitality service because we are so nice that our service can be the best in the world. If we train people, and these all be potentialized and capitalized. So yeah, it's interesting you are perceiving that because, well, I don't know the answer, but I think it's true. And yesterday, I was telling Nick, I went to a concert of Gustavo Dudamel. Is a Venezuelan musician, and
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
he's about to be the former LA Philharmonic director. He's moving to New York. It was his last concert in Los Angeles, and it was a fundraising concert for the Airwake in Venezuela. But I think they were at least very thoughtful of mentioning Colombia, and because of what happened, and a bunch of artists from the US and obviously Venezuela and Colombia went, and it was very nice, very felt and very, and but the first thing I noticed is it was people were very engaged, mostly Venezuelans, but also people from all over. And then Carlos Vives started to sing, and everyone just like this started dancing.
Wow.
It's like, wow, we really have that. It's just magical. I love it, including
That's
me, of course.
what an amazing concert to go to. I actually wrote a little chunk in The Economist on Sunday about kind of Colombia's musical solidarity, and
Yeah.
yeah, then I saw the Dudamel concert. That's amazing
Oh,
that you
did
went to that.
you?
No, no, just
Oh,
I just saw like the kind of clips. I didn't watch
oh,
the whole
that's
thing.
I was, and I'm still in that. It's kind of nice we are having this conversation today because I'm so connected from my God to what's happening there in Colombia just because of that concert. Amazing. And Venezuela, we share some. The flatlands are pretty much the same culture, which is
That's actually
beautiful.
what
The
I was
music.
gonna mention when you were talking about the conductor. I went to see this concert. It was like a quarter. It was about violins and strings, and
Mhm.
it was music from Los Llanos, but it was a
Yes.
Venezuelan guy, absolutely incredible, playing with musicians from Colombia. And I think like Los Llanos for me is an absolutely fascinating part of
Ah,
Colombia that
yes.
I've
And the
just
music.
recently started to get to know a bit more. And like when you were talking about kind of why Colombians are such good hosts and like hospitality, I've never been to, I'd love to go to Venezuela, and I hear that it's quite similar over there. But this experience I had 2 weeks ago that like really stays with me was near Los Llanos, kind of the transition zone between like the Amazon and Los Llanos, which is the plains. And I went up the Orinoco River and was staying with this small Piaroa community of indigenous people called San Luis de Zama. And they were so peaceful and just like opened their, doors to let me stay there for 4 days. And it was, very, very culturally different, but they were curious, they were respectful. They took, I probably asked them the same question like over and over again. And every time they were so patient with explaining their worldview to me. And I just think those are experiences that like you don't often have, where people want to tell you about their culture because they're really, really proud of it and they want to share that and they want that to go people to know about them. And I think like a lot of the magic for me of being in Colombia is moments like that where you feel like you really get inside someone else's culture, even if it's just for a few days. And I think that's like magical.
It is.
What stuck out about their worldview?
It's all about balance. I asked them, what does love mean to you? And
Huh.
kind of prompted like moments of reflection. We're all like in hammocks, sat around a kind of braided mat inside this
Mm.
absolutely incredible maloca that they built, like a huge kind of honeycomb shaped central meeting place. And they thought about it for a moment, and then they said like it means kind of living in harmony, like being in balance and in harmony with your wife or your husband. And then I also asked them like, what do you think of loneliness? You know, what's the word for loneliness in your language, or solitude? And that, we really had to work on a translation for that. That took like 10, 15 minutes to come up with the translation, because the kind of concept of solitude, of being alone emotionally and physically, doesn't really exist in a society that's super collective. So that was one thing that stood out. And the other one was their openness to kind of pivoting away from their traditions in order to conserve their traditions. So thinking about food sovereignty and like food security is kind of fundamental to their daily lives, but also their like cultural survival. So because this is a region that has like lots of flooding, and the flooding's getting heavier,
Hmm.
they're also aware that, you know, maybe young people may not want to stay in the community anymore, they might leave. So they're experimenting with their orchard, and every family has their own orchard, but they also have built what they call like an experimental conuco. So it's really, really close to the main village, and they're experimenting with like different agroforestry techniques. So they've got like each little plot has a cacao tree, a copozu tree, a pineapple plant, limoncillo, like different plants that grow at different rates, so it would shade the other one. And they're just seeing if the fact that it's closer to their where they all live means that like younger people are, it makes their lives easier to go and harvest,
Hmm.
if it's actually a more kind of climate resilient way of producing food. And that was done with, I think, some people from Europe that came over. You know, this kind of interchange of culture that was absolutely fascinating. So yeah, that was a really beautiful experience.
Was there anything interesting you ate there with them?
Yes, Yuca
I knew
Brava,
there would
which,
be. That's yeah.
well, firstly was fish, like amazing fish that, yeah, they artisanal. I can't even remember all the different names, but it was just absolutely delicious. But the Yuca Brava really stuck with me.
Okay.
And I had underestimated how hard that whole process is, you
Oh,
know,
it's
from
incredible. Yeah.
incredible. And the woman that was
Yeah.
doing it with me was this kind of abuela in her 70s, and she's going off into the cornuco and she's harvesting, like cutting down all the trees, getting the yucca roots, and then making the cassava pancake, which I tried to do it and completely broke the whole thing, and everyone laughed at me. Like, and I didn't realize that it's kind of a technique that you graduate from. So you start doing the simple bit of like the kind of the flour at the beginning, and then
Hmm.
you're allowed to make small ones, and then like you're like the maestro, you know, and then you can make the big cassava pancakes that just last for weeks. So
Were
that was a,
they soaking the yuca, or were they grating it?
I think it was both. So
Okay.
it was at the beginning. It was, can't remember the name of the contraption, but kind of like to get rid of the venom or
Yeah, yeah, like
whatever,
the tapiti, or what's the other? There's another mata frio in Colombia usually.
to get rid of that,
Yeah.
and then I think it was grated. I'm actually trying to think of the method, because I came into the part where we
Yeah.
were
Okay.
sieving it, you know, to
Yeah.
make the fine flour,
Mm.
and then that was put onto um, the big fire.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm trying to think about. I think it was grated. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sometimes there's like different techniques. Sometimes like you soak it and grate it. Sometimes you just soak it for a really long time and put it like directly in the mate frio. There's different ways. I was just curious because it's so regional. Like every little like step in that process, it
Is there
there's like
a cassave you prefer from all the ones you have tried, Nick, throughout the Amazon?
well, I mean, I prefer the Yucca Brava. I
Uh-huh.
think the reward is much bigger, even though the process is much harder in
Yeah.
using it.
The
But
reward is
like
much
all the
bigger.
different varieties of yucca, like there's so many, and like I couldn't tell you. It's hard to, and it's like so many. You go to a village somewhere, and there's like they don't always know what they have. It's like these are the 7 varieties we've planted for each different things,
Yeah.
and there's really no way of me knowing if that's the thing I had at 2 hours away. before, and there's never
Yeah.
been like scientific studies on these things unless you're into like a more of a semi-urban rural part of Brazil where there's universities around, and it's actually been studied what has. But it's like there's so many nuances with yucca. It's crazy.
I also, this, what you just mentioned about not knowing kind of which type it is because there hasn't been a scientific study.
Yeah.
This is something I really noticed when I was there. They were like, everyone, you always want to measure, like, how high is it? How tall is it? What specific species is it?
Yeah.
And it's just like, well, we don't know because that
Yeah.
information isn't. We don't need to categorize that. Like, we just know
Yeah.
how it behaves, in different climates, and it really makes you aware of your own kind of very Western perspective when you're
Yeah.
trying to quantify things and put it in
Yeah.
context all the
Yeah.
time. And but yeah, I
A
think.
different way of relating with nature too, right?
Yeah.
And I also met this fisherman who he studies this particular fish for years because that's his kind of workplace, and he is like the world's leading expert in this type of fish that's an ornamental fish that's really desirable in aquariums around the world
Okay.
because he's just studied it all the time, and his way of kind of measuring and tracking this is like this beautiful book that he draws in, he sketches, he takes notes, and then he presented at a scientific conference, and it was this new information about this way this fish reproduces, and he just said he was met with silence, complete silence, because
Hmm.
his way of understanding the river and the fish in front of him was just so different from the language that they had worked in. But he had presented new information about a fish that
Hmm.
is globally in demand and is one of the most trafficked fish species. I thought that was a fascinating testimony from him. Yeah.
Nick, I
Go
have a
ahead. Yeah.
question about
You go.
storytelling, but I don't want to move too far away from products if you
No, no,
want.
it's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, as storytelling is something that one of those terms that by now I think people take for granted,
Hmm.
and I I know there are people that take storytelling seriously and are professional about it, as you are, as Nick are. And how would you define storytelling, and also how to have a good judgment of what a successful story is in terms of like the values that storytelling should honor, because we live in a world full of information. So yeah, I'm curious about that.
Well, firstly, I think, Nick, you're an amazing storyteller. I
Thank you.
love your
Likewise. Likewise.
storytelling
Yeah, me,
reports
are two
from.
passionate storytellers, so I think we
I
should
I mean, I'm sure you have lots of thoughts on this as well, Nick, but I think there's like it kind of runs on two levels for me. And I think that the storytelling that's become very ubiquitous, like especially on social media, is maybe a story that is visually appealing, but it lacks the structural analysis of like what's the deeper problem here.
Hmm.
Mm.
And I think that storytelling, it needs to be. I always think of it as kind of, because my style of reporting is like I have to really go to that place and be there and be with the people and kind
Hmm.
of do like a deep dive.
Likewise.
So
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
exactly what you do, yeah. And I
Yeah.
think it's bringing faraway places closer to people at home, and
Hmm.
that could be the angle that you choose that finds the thing that's relevant to them, but it's also like what's the emotional feeling that you leave your reader with, who are the
Hmm.
characters. And I am very sparing with quotes. Like, I will only really use a quote if I feel that it captures a particular turn of phrase, or there's something very memorable about that. But I
Hmm.
would always want to point to a deeper
Mm.
problem or a deeper
Point.
point, or connect it to a global issue. And I think particularly with conservation, rainforests, indigenous communities, it's it's so easy to just kind of romanticize bits or just actually get a bit of the problem and then realize that you've completely neglected to talk about, their economic livelihoods or something like
Right.
that. So I think I'm basically very skeptical of most things now.
No,
Yeah.
likewise, and I think for me it's like even simpler because I am so much more skeptical, especially in the last 5-10 years, of everything that's online or where it's coming from. I think for me it's just a successful story is just. But was it success the question you had? Is it successful? Was that your
Yeah,
question, Jolie?
What
successfully
defines it?
Or
in a round way, not
okay, yeah. I mean, for
successful.
me, it's just is the story honest? Is
Yeah,
it just honest? Is it your honest thoughts about something? Are you trying to give the reader an honest, not review, but just idea of what's happening in this
yeah,
place? Because it's like, it's so hard to find now. Like, there's just so much shit everywhere. It's just
yeah.
shit all over the walls of everything all the time. And it's just like being pumped into our brains all the time and our ears.
Which compromise trust, right?
Yeah,
That's
exactly. Like, I don't trust anything. And I think Claire was saying the same thing. She's
yeah,
skeptical of everything. So am I. And that's hard. And I think it takes a lot of time to kind of build that trust with the reader. And it's not something that you can do in one story.
so in a way,
And
storytelling should make you to believe again.
I
I
think
think it
that's
needs
a
to.
nice sentiment. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I
Go
think it
ahead.
needs to. I think you need to inspire people. I do think. Obviously, it depends on the type of reporting. Like if you're doing a political piece, probably not.
Of course. Yeah.
But you do need to. I think at the end of the day, like people read to escape. They read to be entertained. They read to discover. They read to, like you do have to have that storytelling in the sense of like you can get lost in this place or this person or this history and it's not dry and you're not telling someone what's going on, it's showing
Yeah.
someone. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of the journey for me has been learning to trust my perspective on something,
Yeah.
not worrying that what I feel or think could be wrong or someone
Yeah.
else might see it
It's
differently and they're
therapy.
more. But it's a long process. It's
No.
like
Yeah. I
why
mean,
is
it's so hard to trust yourself, and especially when you have editors pushing back on certain things all the time, and
Yeah.
expect a story in a certain way. Yeah, and
yeah
it's hard to kind of just build that confidence in yourself.
Yeah, it's both for the reader or
Yeah.
the audience and yourself. And I was thinking if part of it is to make you be inspired and to believe because there is trust and there is trust that is being rebuilt. Um, it doesn't matter, like the happy story or the positive story is like it doesn't matter anymore how happy or positive it is because when it's genuine, people should be okay with the complexity of it,
Yeah.
which I think is part of the problem with fake news and polarized
Not
recounts of
just
things,
fake
right?
news, just like this
Or yeah, just like
influencer driven
exactly,
dribble
exactly.
that's just
Or
like
Chris, like
promotional
as
shit.
Claire said, like the visual side of it without a point, without the structural analysis of it. Part of the inspiration has to be for people to be okay with complexity and with complicated realities, right?
and
So
that is not something that works with the pace of the news cycle. Like I write sometimes news, but I'm generally a little bit out of the news cycle, which I'm consider a huge privilege to have that position. But if you are a news journalist, like you don't have time now with the pace
Yeah.
to do all of the reporting. Like your sources are people's posts on X.
the
And that's,
rhythm of
Yeah.
it, yeah.
and I have like huge sympathy for colleagues that are doing that because it's just really hard. And then the kind of paradox that people trust faces more than they trust an institution. And it's like, well, an institution provides fact checking and it provides, lots of eyes on a story that stops there being factual errors, like those sorts of things. So I think it's kind of keeping that all in balance, which is just really hard.
Yeah.
I mean, Colombia has such a rich history of storytelling, though. Like, and just finding truth, and like Garcia Marquez and all this like magical realism. Just like it's so relevant today.
Hmm.
Like,
To
just
me,
all the
yeah.
absurdities in the world right now, and just the way they were able to kind of
Captured.
capture the kind of truth and emotion of those time periods through writing that was very different. It wasn't just a list of facts. It was very emotional, very feeling driven, very Colombian. Just this
Even
happiness.
even in TV series and script writers, I think Colombia has a tradition of TV shows that are better quality than even the what it's called telenovelas, which are really
Uh,
not telenovelas in Colombia. They capture the reality, the complexity of it in such a good way. I was talking to a friend yesterday, a Colombian, about the Victorinos, which is maybe a story you are not familiar as with because
Oh,
it's from the 80s, with all that period, the worst period of the drug trafficking and Pablo Escobar. We grew up in that. We were teenagers at the time. And even those shows that are partially magical and fiction, but they capture this
mhm.
complexity and the different sides and the class struggle and the political side of it. Amazing, even those. So yeah, that's part of the tradition, I think, that
yeah.
you
I mean,
that you
I don't know if you've seen the Cien Años de Soledad, the 100 Years of Solitude, the second
on.
season that came on
I
to
haven't watched it.
Netflix.
It's good or what?
I I think it's really, really, really well done. And
Okay.
the with this second season particularly, I really had all the themes that are in it, the kind of, between contrast between modernity and traditions and development and preservation and the United Fruit Company and the banana massacre that happened on the plantation. And, should you let a foreign power have land and, have lots of industry? This guy wrote in the 60s and it's so relevant today. It's like I felt like I was just like, this is as if he's written this 10 years ago. That's the kind of feeling I had. And a little bit the same when I was watching The House of Spirits, the adaptation of
Oh
the
yeah,
Isabel Allende. Same
yeah.
feeling. It's like these themes are back from a long time ago, and like the lasting power of those stories, which I just found really amazing. I would love to hear what you think, especially as a Colombian who probably grew up with Marquez's novels.
Yeah, I saw it announced, and I was watching Delirio, which is based on the novel of Laura Restrepo, Delirium, and it's kind of a similar
Yeah,
situation that with Cien Años de Soledad, and it's relevant again. It's based on the 80s, so that's why I have that period so present now too, and yeah, these are at the end of the day partially how do you say, fiction, semi-fiction. I don't know that there is a term for that. I forgot. There is a technical term for those, like in between shows, and but it's amazing in part because of the original writers are so brilliant, like Laura Restrepo, Garcia Marquez. But yeah, it's part of the political complexity of these countries and how people approach that, which again, good storytelling,
Hmm.
talking about that, right? Good storytelling.
Delirio had such a good soundtrack. I thought, and I actually did a
Uh,
piece a
yeah,
couple.
it's original, I was thinking the same, and I think at least part of it is original musicians composing for the show. Amazing, me too. I noticed that.
Yeah, and I did a story a couple of years ago when the first season of Cien Años de Soledad came out, and it was all about the kind of new, how Netflix's and other streamers like new strategy for these regions was like local first and then global. And it was how this kind of new crop of production companies like from
Yeah.
Mexico and Colombia were having their own freedom to write and produce their own content on their own terms, like unlike Narcos, which is ultimately a kind of US view of what was happening in Colombia, even though there was some, Colombian
Other
involvement.
audiences. Yeah.
And then some of these TV shows from like District Frontier was one that I thought, Wild District was what I thought was amazing, which has this like corruption scandal thriller feel to it, but it's also a very honest look about reintegration of ex-guerrillas into life in Bogotá after the armed conflict, but it didn't lead with that, but that was one of the kind of underlying strands. And or another one that was the El Robo del Siglo, which is a kind of comedy about a really an awful bank heist in the Caribbean coast, but
Yeah.
it's really funny, and it's like
Which
that's like the emotional power of the storytelling, isn't it? It stays in your mind because you've got these images of like guys drunk in their trucks because they're failed thieves, but it's the underlying story is coming something really serious. So I think like what scenes and what emotions are you left with after watching or reading or listening to something? Yeah.
Yeah, as a local, it makes you feel the difference between something that is written or told for which audience, right? You can tell. I have uh, a similar experience of Narcos, and I didn't want to watch it in part because I know it's well produced. I know all the quality of it, but it gave me a different feeling than these other shows, and I think it has to do with that, which what is the purpose of it in the end, and it's partially informative, does honor that code of truth and honesty, even if it's partly fictional, doesn't matter. um, and seems these shows are a way of you know in, it's in the end is what the majority of people watch, right, or know about the country or consume about a place.
Yeah.
So we cannot undermine that, um, or take or not take that seriously.
I think it's, you do have to be maybe pragmatic and realistic about it. Like if that is what gets people through the door, and that's they turn up in Medellin with these ideas, then it's like, right, how does, I don't know, the way tourism is set up, the types of tours that are on offer, the way people in hostels and whatever that they talk about this history, like how can you reframe what people know? Like I
Hmm.
don't think you can necessarily blame people for not knowing these things, especially when history, as we know, is generally just so badly taught across the world. So that's sort of, and I think there are some amazing, at least in Medellin, like amazing tour companies doing the history of Medellin in Colombia besides
Yeah.
Pablo Escobar, and I think like that really stays with people when they do engage with that side of things. Um, I actually wanted to ask you guys, seeing as you're based in the US, has Vice made it to the United States yet? Bit of a subject
Essentially,
change.
no, I'm glad you brought that up because we're running out of time, and I wanted to talk about Vice.
Yeah.
No, there is, as far as I know, there's no pipeline of Vice. Maybe, I mean, it's like in my bar, there's a couple of bottles, maybe in Juliana's, but no, there's no. Is it even legal to come to the
I don't
U.S.
think
at this
so.
point?
I think they're still working on the local, legal framework of it. So I don't think internationally it still has a root. It took a long time with rum, and I think they're still working on that bridge for local rum, Colombian. I don't think, not that I know. Same, Nick. I haven't seen it. I
Well,
don't
I
believe.
mean, I assume that there's something going on with what happened with Kashaza, and they couldn't call it Kashaza. There was some weird legal loopholes that kept going on for like
Yeah, but with
years.
Vici, I haven't seen. Not that I know, at least. I
Yeah.
mean, unless it is, chef that they are like they are so excited
Yeah,
about these things that they find a way, but
yeah.
not like systematized or just formalized.
Because
No,
I
but
think
like,
now,
go ahead.
sorry.
So go
Um,
on. Yeah, sorry.
yeah, now if the producers can get their sanitary license out in Vima, they do have the right to export. But it's just
Okay.
about, yeah. So that's the kind of new change, and I think it's a really amazing piece of legislation. Actually, it kind of protects both the heritage, but also the ethnicity of the producer, which is no like a DOP, but it's linked to your ethnicity. Like you can't produce feature unless you're from basically your grandparents made it or you're from that part of Colombia, which I think is quite
But aren't there a lot of more
impressive.
modern Vice distillers now? And are they collaborating with somebody else, or how does that work?
Yeah, there's definitely grey areas I think in this,
Okay.
but the people that I've met that are producing Vice, even if they're doing it in Cali, for example, which
Hmm.
Yeah.
traditionally it would be made in the Pacific rather than in the cities, they still have that heritage. I think they still have that connection. Their mom or their grandparents are from Choco or from Cauca or whatever.
Okay.
But yeah, there's also kind of a capitalist element to it, right? There's people in Bogota who are marketing the Vice that they buy from producers in the Pacific. And I think their argument would be we're opening the doors to the market, to the world. So, like, people in New York hear about this and they want to buy it. There's a big debate within in there about whether that's right or not. But no, it's just I met a couple of bartenders from London who were like really into Vice and they wanted to bring it back to London to their bar, and I just wondered
Right.
if that's happened anywhere
I mean,
cool
I'm
in.
sure at some point it'll go the way of mezcal. Once all the legal things get
Hmm.
sorted out. Maybe not as big as mezcal. I think that's
No.
And for
that's
what you are
that's
saying, Claire, that legal fight that was happening, I think a year or so ago, it's being cleared out, apparently, or it's in a better place now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's been
okay. So,
passed and regularized,
Uh huh.
regulated.
uh,
Sorry.
okay. So restaurants and bars are allowed to sell viche now.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
honestly everywhere in Colombia. I
Yeah.
But,
think.
but wasn't there like an issue like a in Bogota like a year or two
Yeah,
ago
yeah,
where
that's
like
what I'm saying.
restaurants and bars were being
There was an
their
issue, but
viche was being
apparently, right.
confiscated for because
Yeah,
they
yeah,
weren't allowed to sell it or something. I don't know. It's like it's
It
yeah.
been
was
hard
it
to. Okay.
it was
All right.
illegal to sell Viche outside the Pacific coast, basically,
Mhm.
Okay.
with the exception of events like Petronio Alvarez. But then people would have their goods sometimes like seized from them traveling from the Pacific to Cali.
Okay.
But now it's legal. You can sell it, and there's Viche bars in Bogota, like
Okay.
like popping up more.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
Viche Negroni is a regular feature in my diet.
All right. Yeah. No, I mean, I could see like I bet eventually somebody will open a Viche bar in New York or London or something. With just all these small producers of Viche, like they did with mezcal, and
It's an
it,
icon.
it'll it'll happen. I think.
So good. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's yeah it's slow. These things are slow to kind of get outside.
Huh.
All right. Um, well, Claire, we could talk to you for like
Yeah.
hours. I think
Yeah.
like this could
With
go on
beach and
forever.
Negroni, I think we
Yeah.
can talk over beach and Negroni.
Yeah.
I'll like hold
So
you to
no,
that.
really, thank you for taking the time to chat with us, and we'll have to do this again eventually.
Yeah, and I
Thank
have
you.
to say it's an honor for me and very fulfilling to talk to people that are not from Colombia and that somehow know and get more of the place we are from and South America than we are. So that's great. Thank you. Thank you for
No,
spending so much time figure those places out and also I don't know, just enjoy them. It's an honor for
thank
me.
you. No, I mean it's I think honor is the word. I always think of it as an honor to be able to report in a country like Colombia and to tell people stories that can't let that go. I'm always
Talking
so
about
I know bit of reality hitting there. Just always
yeah.
so conscious of not not telling the stories that people expect and telling other stories about the country. And obviously, you do have to cover occasionally the war
Yeah.
on drugs and cocaine, but there's so much here. But yeah, a real pleasure to speak to you both. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.